So why don't we go ahead and get started? I am going to be letting other people talk for most of this morning for once. So we can go ahead and I think get things started. This week we wanted to circle back to, after spending so much time on Build Back Better, Blue Economy, we sort of wanted to take a step back and think about other things that this group might be able to work on as far as, implementation kind of projects, or, what that next grant we might look for on behalf of the region might be, or as Teresa Pinto has mentioned, there are likely to be some ARPA resources available for us to use in the coming months. So we thought a good first step to that conversation would be to really discuss the regional economic development priorities that our various organizations have set and some commonalities between them. Not so much thinking about a separate policy distinct from those, but sort of thinking of this group as an implementation arm of those other organizations, and thinking about how we understand those priorities and which we might be able to tackle with a small project or a conversation or a convening, etc. So we sent you 3 links with the agenda. One was to SRPC's a comprehensive economic development strategy that we have as an economic development district. One was to REDC's SEDS that they have for the same purpose. And then one was to the Rockingham Planning Commission's regional master plan. And generally speaking, since this group is focused on the Seacoast, those are the 3 regional entities that we really sort of overlap with on these calls. So we were going to start off with brief presentations, sort of putting those plans in context, with a little bit of a reminder of, why do we do them? What statutes are we sort of keeping in mind or trying to cover when we're putting those together? And then we were going to do an exercise in the second half of the call with, digging into some of the commonalities between the themes that our 3 organizations have chosen for our respective regions. So any questions before we dive into all of that?
I have one. Brentwood just recently created a economic development committee, and their chair is former Senator John Morgan. A lot of you probably know him. I'd like it if you could join this group. I just wanted to get your opinion.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Send him the link or send his contact info over to us and we'll get him on the list.
Got it.
All right, not seeing any other questions. I think Jen Kimball needs to hop off a little bit early, so we're going to let her go first.
Thanks. And actually, I just got a notice that my 9:30 meeting was canceled, so I will actually get to hang out a little bit, but still happy to go first. So I'm Jen Kimball, and I am with the Regional Economic Development Center, REDC. We're based in Raymond. We were originally in Exeter, now we're in Raymond. And so I am a little bit about who REDC is. We're a private nonprofit organization. We're an EDC that offers technical assistance, business development training, graphic design support to small businesses and startups. We also do business financing through various funding sources, and then economic development support to municipalities. We were established in 1994 as a regional nonprofit development corporation serving Rockingham County. In 1996, they hired their first full-time employee to provide economic development assistance, and then also administer a regional revolving loan fund. to the 37 communities in Rockingham County. Since then, and over the years, we have expanded both our SEDS/EDD territory, our lending territory, et cetera. We support numerous communities throughout the state and businesses as well. At present, we provide lending to communities across southern New Hampshire and also technical assistance and microloans statewide. So since 2000, REDC has been responsible for researching and writing the region's comprehensive economic development strategy, which is we call SEDS. And it's a regional economic master plan that results from a local planning process. Its purpose is to guide the economic growth of a region. And then shortly in 2003, we received the designation as an economic development district, an EDD, by the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration. As part of that designation, we're given funding every year to develop the SEDS. So what is an EDD? Both both REDC and Stratford are EDDs now. And an EDD is a multi-jurisdictional entity that helps lead locally based, regionally driven economic development planning. It's a designation from the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Having the ED designation it's a federal designation that opens up funding opportunities through the EDA. And then as an EDD, we are required by federal code to continue the SEDS planning process on an annual basis. So with that, we do a SEDS. So I don't know if sometimes with the weird background, it doesn't work. This is the 2020 SEDS. And James put a link. I'm assuming, I didn't check the link, but I'm assuming it's to the most current one. Every 5 years, we do a SEDS. And as part of the planning process, we evaluate the strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities every 5 years as part of a broad-based community vision process. The outcome of the process are our SEDS vision, goals, and objectives. They are designed to promote and encourage responsible and diversified economic development in our region that fosters higher skill, higher wage jobs, supports innovative industry and sectors, and improve the economic conditions, and strengthen the region's resiliency due to economic disruption. And interestingly enough, the EDA required including a resiliency part of the SEDS. I think it was in 2017 they started it. So just before the pandemic, and of course now it's become even that more critical and important. In 2000, we went through the original public visioning session and developed in 2020, we went through the visioning process, and we now have our current 5-year goals and objectives. The goals fall under the following 4 categories: infrastructure development, workforce attraction and retention, housing, and sustainable living. And then of note, these goals were developed before the start of the pandemic, or just as it was starting. And so back at the end of 2020, we also did a review of where we were at in the state and region, and we've included some additional areas that need strengthening due to the economic disruption from the pandemic. And I know we'll cover that in a little bit, but so that's kind of an overview of REDC and what we do as an EDD. That it? Any questions? We good? Move on. We'll save questions to later. Jen, you're muted.
I was just gonna say, sounds good.
Oh, okay.
Great, thank you, Jen. Next, I think we were going to give Tim Roach a few minutes to talk about RPC as a planning commission and their regional master plan.
All right, thanks, James. I think I was going to get into just very briefly what we are, the statutory functions, why we were set up, why we exist, and hopefully a little bit about what we do, and then no great detail about the master plan, but I think we'll talk about that in the whiteboard part that you've set up for the second half of the meeting. So anyways, I'm looking around at the screen here, I think a a lot of you know what RPCs are, but so I'll just try to keep this at the high enough level not to bore anybody. But so basically the RPCs are legislatively enabled political subdivisions of the state under RSA 3646. You know, you can start yawning now with that because that's pretty much what we are. You know, we're member-based organizations made up of communities that voluntarily join and pay annual dues. Each member community can appoint 2 to 4 commissioners, depending on their population. And really that's really the heart of what the RPCs are. It's that grassroots side of it where these individuals that are representing the communities to bring the interests of those communities to the regional level so that we can find commonalities, efficiencies, and, you know, sort of use that rising tide approach to bring the region up. You know, so, but we're here as advisory organizations. We provide advisory technical assistance on local planning matters. We have absolutely no jurisdiction over local planning decisions or the local planning process. You know, we're here in the legislation. There's 2 things, really 2 or 3 things really that we're required to do. And one is what we'll talk about in a little while is the complete and maintain a regional master plan, comprehensive plan. We're also required to do a regional housing needs assessment. Coincidentally, both of those are required to be done every 5 years, similar to the SEDS. Works out pretty nicely, actually. So, and really other than that, we're here to work with the municipalities, the counties to implement programs to ensure that the region is developing, improving, you know, protecting the resources, historical resources, environmental resources, you know, to make sure that that is happening in a regional comprehensive way. So by legislation, like I said, each of those, the documents that we're required to do, the regional master plan and the regional housing needs assessment need to be updated every 5 years. They are not funded in the legislation. They're not funded by the state. And I've probably said that too many times to this group. So what tends to happen is we wait for an empathetic federal, you know, delegation who will work with us to find funding to do the regional master plan and, you know, wait for a pandemic to happen. So there's some ARPA money to do the regional housing needs assessment, and then we can get going and doing what we're supposed to do. But aside from that, I think the biggest thing we're known for is our transportation work and our transportation planning. We are the designated, both we, when I say we, it's the RPC, it's Stratford Regional Planning, Nashua Regional Planning, and Southern New Hampshire Planning Commissions. We are metropolitan planning organizations, which is basically the conduit through which federal transportation dollars flow. Basically, if we don't do our job and on the transportation planning side, the funding for construction of pretty much every highway project you see out there is at risk of not happening. That's really the key thing that the Metropolitan Planning Organization does, and the RPC is serving in that function, is to make sure that the public process is run, the priorities are set, and we coordinate with the DOT through their processes like the 10-year plan to make sure that the federal requirements are met and the transportation dollars continue to flow into the region. You're probably aware, most of you that are in municipalities right now are aware that the 10-year plan process here in New Hampshire is ongoing. And that's how you get these projects that, you know, end up in the SEDS, ultimately need to get into the 10-year plan and the transportation improvement program before anything actually happens to them. So, you know, when I get right down to it, I mean, I feel like the regional planning commissions at their core aren't all that different than this group that's formed on the economic development side. You know, it's a grassroots, bottom-up group of people that come together. They understand regional collaboration is essential to the success of individual communities. You know, I often use an elevator pitch that says like the RPC is a resource for communities. It's a forum where we come together and can discuss issues at a regional level. And then we can be a voice that gets back to either Concord or to the, to Washington, depending on what the issue is. So I've is participating in this group over the last year or so, or two, or whatever, it's been a year and a half. Thinking about how it's sort of transformed or begun to transform with this idea of cedars coming around. I've made this argument before, I think early on, when Taylor first came in and spoke to us, but the regional planning process and the SEDS process, when it's funded, it has a really robust public engagement process. It has great data development, great analysis. We set a clear vision and comprehensive goals for the region. So from there, the plan that comes out of that is the perfect vehicle to inform the SEDS, to work closely with, from our perspective, to work closely with REDC and make sure that the goals are consistent between the two, and that the projects are cohesive and are meeting that whole regional goal. I think that's really, having a direct connection between the regional planning process and SEDS, will give you that set of projects that you really want to have, and have it backed up by the data analysis. So I'm not going to go into our regional plan in any great detail. I will say that I think we've got something here that if we make the investment in, my personal opinion, we don't necessarily need to call ourselves a cedar, but we can do what we need to do for the region based on what we have between our regional plans and the EDDs. And I think that's pretty much where we're at this point.
All right. Thank you, Tim. And you guys hear from me a lot, so I'm gonna give our director, Jen Sizz, a couple of minutes to talk about SRPC and our SEDS.
All right. So I have the easy job because Jen already described what an EDD is, and Tim already described what a Regional Planning Commission is, and much of our roles. Stratford Regional Planning Commission, we are a regional planning commission, we are a metropolitan planning organization, and we're an economic development district. So just to help make it all confusing. So along those lines, like Rockingham Planning Commission, we came out of legislation from the 1960s, and communities kind of banding together primarily to talk about traffic issues in their communities and looking to plan comprehensively. And so that was our genesis, and it still kind of carries through where a lot of our work is transportation related. Stratford Regional Planning Commission, our name's a bit of a misnomer. We are all of Stratford County, the 13 communities in Stratford County, but we are also Brookfield and Wakefield, which are Carroll County, and Newmarket, Northwood, and Nottingham, which are Rockingham County. Just to keep it confusing. And I think one of the themes here is just that there are a lot of different definitions of what a region is in New Hampshire. And depending on what our role is, that region may vary. In 2015, Stratford Regional Planning was designated as an EDD by EDA. So we're kind of a baby EDD. And only 15 of our 18 communities are part of the EDD. Newmarket, Northwood, and Nottingham, being in Rockingham County, are part of REDC's EDD. Keeping it fun. So there's a kind of, with those overlapping boundaries between the regional planning commissions and the economic development districts, we tend to work together when it comes to our comprehensive planning and recognizing those overlaps between our entities. I mentioned we were designated in 2015 as an EDD. Shortly after that, our federal administration had proposed to eliminate Economic Development Administration as an entity in the federal budget. And so we went through a few little bumps in our initial funding and getting fully incorporated into what EDA calls their partnership planning program. We are officially in as of this year. So this summer, I know. So it took a while, but we finally have our consistent funding under the partnership planning program. We now have one of the first 3-year funding grants for an EDD that covers the preparation of our SEDS and all of that good business. We also currently have a CARES Act grant that was made available to economic development districts, and that's what we've been using to facilitate these conversations here around the table. So keeping, allowing us to have the staff time for Natalie and James and Susie to kind of put in everything together so we can have this collaborative forum. So with all of that in mind, we were just about to launch into the development of our updated 5-year SEDS in 2020 when the pandemic hit. And so we hit the brakes, talked to EDA and said, hey, instead of doing our SEDS, can we start facilitating this group? And redirected our dollars. We put our SEDS temporarily on hold and then launched into it with the perspective of looking at what are kind of some of those things we already knew were issues for our communities and the region, and how has that changed given the pandemic? And so as a result, our SEDS has a lot of those common themes that you would see pre-pandemic, thinking about economic growth and infrastructure and housing and workforce and education and community vibrancy, but then it also pulled in some new themes, such as thinking more about business operations than we might have otherwise pre-pandemic, thinking about childcare and age friendliness. So pulled in some new themes. Throughout the SEDS, we looked at what were the pre-COVID conditions, what did we anticipate the impacts of COVID would be, and what's our post-COVID outlook? And then set a series of goals and identified some actions. And if you'll remember a few months ago, we brought you the actions that are included in the SEDS. We do have a series that are specific to us as a region and what we can do under our purview versus the municipal project listing at the end of the SEDS. You all helped us to rank those and helped us pick some of those projects that we would start working forward in this current fiscal 22. So that's kind of the fast version of who we are and what we do. And I see Shanna has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question kind of for all three of you. I'm kind of wondering, really focusing on the comprehensive economic development plans that you guys do, how community outreach in order to kind of get input in looks like when you're well-funded and looks like when you're not well-funded, and kind of what the difference is.
Ooh, so I don't know, I'll jump in and maybe start, and I think many of you remember kind of back to 2013, 2014, that time frame when we had a large grant from HUD to update our comprehensive plans at the regional planning level. And under that, we spent like a year just doing outreach, whether it was working with stakeholders in like nonprofit, allied sector, state agencies, or hosting a variety of different community forums. I mean, we had every form of outreach possible to maximize the number of voices that we could get into the plan. I think that is kind of like the epitome, like that is the model. And that level of outreach isn't necessarily always successful. Otherwise, I think several of you were, we did right before the pandemic, we had like a large forum that we did all morning facilitated set of conversations on housing, economic development and transportation with an eye towards updating the housing needs assessment, the SEDS, and our metro transportation plan. And I think that thrown in with like some surveys, some conversations with groups, stakeholder groups like this, that tends to be kind of the the status quo. And if we're not funded, it's just a bunch of research, like I'll take the housing needs assessment. If we're not funded, it's just a bunch of research that we slap together, talk to 1 or 2 people and put a cover on it. So.
I can jump in because we're a little different than what Jen and Tim do, because we're actually a private nonprofit, and so one of our primary businesses is lending, and we have lending from all sorts of sources. And so a lot of times with a lot of the funding that we get, we have a component of it is for outreach or for, like marketing or business assistance, things like that. Additionally, we have been funded as a partner community, like Jen was describing, and getting these 3-year grants. Well, since I think, early in the mid 2000s, I started at REDC in 2009, and we were well into the funding there. So we've been well funded as far as public outreach and things like that for quite a while. And we have all sorts. In fact, we just put together a marketing plan and as part of our CARES Act grant as well. One of the things we offer is this business technical assistance, and part of it was that we have to make sure we're reaching out and providing that to anyone who needs it, kind of thing. And so we've gone through radio ads and marketing. We have an in-house graphic design person who does a lot of our marketing and website, and we reach out to lenders and lending events and that kind of thing. And then when we do our 5-year SEDS, we involve because our territory is so big and we have 4 regional planning commissions as part of it, we get a cooperation and assistance from each of them to try and reach as many people as possible and get input from the public. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's important to include outreach and development of these documents. And I know, I've seen the funding ebb and flow, and I just think it's so important to make the point that these documents are so much better and so much richer when we are gaining input from the stakeholders, the business community, all of that. And, funding just keeps getting cut and cut and cut. And, it's hard to watch the repercussions of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Shanna. And I know Tim has his hand up, so I'll be really, really short. And I think that one of the things I want to say is part of why we wanted to start this conversation here today and moving forward and trying to identify priorities and strategies is that each of these 3 plans that we just mentioned, they all do have a solid outreach basis. So we're starting from a really good point. We've got a lot of kind of strength behind us in those plans. And so they make sense to be that starting point of a conversation. Tim, and then Nate.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add it. I said, when we're well funded, I shouldn't even say that. I should say just consistently funded, because what happens is we end up making these big pushes and we're in everybody's face, and Agenda 21 comes out and tries to knock us down, and then we go away and we're largely forgotten. We're kind of rolling under the current, right? What we need to be as RPCs, and maybe it's less of an issue for REDC, is present at a consistent level so that outreach is ongoing and there's continuous communication and feedback. That's probably the biggest failing of the regional planning process in my eyes right now, is that we just can't do that the way we're set up and funded. So I hate I get into these things about whining about being funded. It's not what I want to do, but I think there's an issue there that if we can be more present, we're going to be more successful. We're going to be top of mind for the communities, and things are going to continue to work forward instead of start and stop.
Nate?
Awesome. Thanks. It was super good just listening to everybody and seeing what different structures exist out there. For those who don't know me, which is probably most people, my name is Nate Robertson, and I'm a community and economic development planner at Merrimack Valley Planning Commission. So right over the state line there in Massachusetts, we're your neighbors to the south, but we have 15 communities. We're a state designated RPA. We are MPO, which kind of funds our transportation wing, and we're an EDD. So similar to a lot of folks here, we have these multiple designations, which comes with roles and responsibilities that overlap, as well as funding. And historically, we've had our economic development department has been a department of one that oversees the SEDS. And that's where the funding comes from, you know. And I think we're moderately successful at bringing people to the table. We host like monthly planners meetings for all the planners in our regions to get together and talk about. We do like quarterly town managers and mayors meetings for folks to talk about common issues. So we try to position ourselves centrally. And then when we do sort of like SEDS planning documents, we try to host a lot of those meetings, not in offices, but like at a manufacturing floor or on a bus for like transit, and we try to keep it in interesting places in different communities, which has been okay. We made a big pivot during COVID, which was we kind of in this funky area where there's no regional economic development organization in our region. So, you know, we set up these regional plans. We try to help our municipalities implement them. But it would be a lot better if there was a regional organization that could help implement them. And so really over the past year or two, we decided to choose us to be the kind of the regional economic development implementer, as well as the planner. So we've got a staff of 2, moving to 3 now, with some private money and state money, hopefully, and CARES Act money. We've got a revolving loan fund, which we've had in-house for a long time, which we've kind of retooled. We've been really involved in small business technical assistance, delivering kind of matchmaking between TA providers and small businesses. So really becoming more business kind of facing, as opposed to just municipality facing. And I think our hope is that because we're not just planning now, that we're actually doing pieces, that we can kind of get new people to the table, that we've got some meat on the bone that we can deliver, as well as kind of traditional planning services. So yeah, that's kind of where we are at MVPC, but really interesting just hearing how everyone operates differently, and we've all kind of try to find a corner that works for us.
Great, thanks, Nate. I saw Robin's hand, and then I want to jump over to Natalie to get into the theming exercise. So Robin, go ahead.
Thank you. This was very interesting and helpful to me. And so my broad question is, well, let me say, I didn't think of you, especially you, Tim, in the whole area of transportation. And I wondered for the 3 of you, how involved you are in the port and Ps and even rail, or freeway highway expansion, or better transportation systems. And then for Jen, I guess even Skyhaven. Are you involved in that infrastructure as a component of our transportation systems?
Tim, do you want to go first, and then I can address Skyhaven?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, what I was sort of alluding to there, Robin, was that we, if the planning process isn't done, and the public engagement and everything else that happens related to setting priorities for transportation planning projects, all the analysis, all the modeling, the traffic data, all that, if that doesn't happen, the federal funding doesn't come to the state. So yeah, that's the role the MPO plays, is to make sure that that work gets done, and that we're making a sound investment into the transportation infrastructure. People sometimes say, well, why don't we, when there's a controversial highway project, well, why don't we vote on this? Well, in a way, the process is set up to get public input so that you don't vote on those types of decisions. You get it through the MPO process. That's where your opportunity to have a voice is on these things and decide what the priorities are for the region. So yeah, it comes directly through us.
I did not know that, Tim.
So Robin, as to, a lot of what we do on the transportation side, it does sound, it's a lot of cars and trucks and buses on the traditional road network, but
Not trains or boats.
well, yeah,
Airplanes.
yes and no. So the difference is, like for aviation, that functions separately from the MPO process. So we will communicate with and work with the airports, but their projects don't feed through the MPO. Bicycle pedestrian projects, those will feed through the MPO. You know, transit to a certain degree will as well, depending on the transit system's formation and the FTA funding mechanism. But so a lot of the transportation system does come through the MPO planning process, aviation, not so much.
All right, Charlie and Darren, can we hit these really quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick thing. I know years ago, Nate, I don't know if this applies to Merrimack Valley, but the RPCs, EDDs, EDCs were all very instrumentally involved in broadband planning. And we had a state broadband plan, which I don't believe we actually follow that currently. It's not the guide, the roadmap. To what degree does the work of the EDDs and your work intersect with broadband expansion? Because I think there are inequities and it goes along socioeconomic strata and there's a need for expansion, but I'm just trying to figure out where that gets embedded.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we have seen in the time that I've been here as something that we would like to be more involved with. The big barrier, at least in my time here, has largely been how in our region we could get that implemented, because it seemed like the easiest and best source of funding to do so was Northern Borders Regional Commission money that only applied to 2 of our 18 municipalities. That's something that at least internally we've talked about how we can do more this year now that there can be more ARPA money that we can direct those projects to. But I don't think SRPC has a solid answer of this is what we're doing. Darren?
Yeah, I just had a couple comments for Nate, but Nate, I put my number in the chat. Give me a call after this and I'll let you know what I was thinking. That's all.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Natalie. As I said, we did want to sort of use this conversation as an opportunity to start looking at some of those commonalities and get some thoughts from all of you about how we could leverage this group or work collaboratively towards things that achieve priorities that we all share. Things that are coming out of our master plans or SEDS and things that overlap with your own strategic plans and economic priorities. So with that, Natalie, take it away.
Thank you very much. So let's see, I'm going to share my screen right now and we're going to do a really fun short activity. Let's see. So what we have done is, can everyone see this?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. So what we have done is pulled the main themes from each one of those plans that we shared with you. So RPC's Regional Master Plan, SRPC SEDS, and REDC SEDS, and just listed those main themes so that you can take a look at this and easily sort of identify what the commonalities are with each one of those themes. So what we're going to do, it's a short 3-step activity that we're going to do. First thing, as I said, is going to be looking at these lists and identifying the commonalities. And what I will do is what you guys tell me, I will go ahead and type it in down here so that we have a sort of a short list of what all of those commonalities are. And the next step in the activity is we're going to be using the stamp tool to pick our top 3 priorities, because like James said at the beginning of the call, we potentially will have some funding, but it is going to be very limited. So we obviously can't use that for every one of those themes that we come up with. So we're gonna say, we're gonna pick our top 3 priorities for what those common themes are. And then we can go from there. So I will just ask you guys again, please take a second, look at these themes right here and tell me what commonalities you start to see.
Workforce, affordable housing.
Workforce development.
Infrastructure.
I sort of, I tried to structure them in a way where the commonalities were easy to find at the top.
Environmental issues.
So there's quality of life, community vibrancy, and amenities that all seem to be a quality of life type of issue.
Yes, I know that for SRPC, it says quality of community vibrancy covers quality of life. So we can do quality of life.
There are 2 childcares. I would change that to be affordable childcare.
And access. People are on waiting lists. I know around here in Dover, there's waiting lists. You don't even have access to childcare, whether or not you can afford it.
Okay. Does everyone feel comfortable with this list?
I would, I see REDC as infrastructure, and then economic development, SRPC, and then there is something about economic development in, I'd say economic development, I think would be.
Yeah, so economic development, we have in RPC as dynamic diverse economy,
Right.
and SRPC as economic growth and regional economy, and REDC said. So we can put that in as economic development. Okay, I'll ask you guys, does everyone feel comfortable with this list, or do you see anything else? Good? Okay, great. So really quick, I'm gonna get rid of these master plan.
Hey, Natalie, I had to jump off for a second. This is Darren. There's one I thought was workforce attraction and retention.
Okay, so let me change workforce development. I'll do, I'll just put it in parentheses
We
here.
gotta keep them.
Okay. Good. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of these lists up here just so we can have a little bit more space for voting for the priorities. So what I'm gonna ask you guys to do, does everyone know how to use the stamp tool and whiteboard? So do you all see, there's like a toolbar at the top and it says stamp. Does everyone see that?
I think you need to open the toolbar first. So if you all go to the top of your Zoom, you have the green bar that says you're viewing Stratford Regional Planning Commission screen, and you have a view options with a little down arrow. If you click the down arrow, you'll have a few different options: zoom ratio, request remote control, and annotate. click on annotate, and that brings up the whiteboard toolbar.
Okay, wonderful. So before you guys start stamping, we just have one extra step. So obviously our funding is limited, so we do want to try and prioritize these themes. What we're going to ask is that you pick 3 themes, but do it in priorities number 1, number 2, and number 3. So for your number 1, if you could please use the heart. For your choice number 2, if you can use the star, and for number 3, if you can use a check. That'll let us identify the order of the priorities. So again, just number 1, heart, number 2, star, number 3, check.
How are you defining economic development?
So economic development, so RPC has as SRPC has that economic growth. So it's employment measures. RPC has as regional economy, and I can't remember what REDC has it as, but it's like the big picture assessment of economic success. So like I said, employment figures, business growth and expansion, all of that, labor force. Mm-hmm.
The way, just to add some color to that, I think the way I kind of understand economic development really is like really tactical tools like micro business lending, small business technical assistance, matchmaking for like finding businesses space. That's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, and I think all of those things that you mentioned, Nate, are actually mentioned in our plans too, as far as providing technical assistance to businesses and all of that.
I think that quality of life is important and is being somewhat missed. What we're finding in Dover is that quality of life is becoming the biggest driver to attract skilled people. And skilled people tend to be the key for us to attract businesses. And along with that, you get the environmental issues being looked at, have infrastructure, and you have to have some affordable housing. So I think these are things that are a little different categories rather than being something to choose between. We're seeing that quality of life is huge for attracting businesses and skilled people, at least at this point.
Totally agree with you, Dan. That's something conversation we have often with our municipalities is like workforce. Retaining workforce is a common issue where people go, oh, we just need to bring more workers in. And I feel like sometimes that can be backwards, where if you develop vibrant and thriving communities, you will attract people who want to live there. And those people attract businesses. Sometimes I feel like we get it backwards where we go, well, we want the byproduct first. But at least that's how I like to think of it.
So I think that, yeah, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think we do tend to think of a lot of these issues as being heavily interrelated. I think what we are trying to work towards with this activity is, as a next step, thinking about clear actions that we can start working on to try and advance some of these issues. And it's possible that some of those actions would impact more than one of these thematic areas. We just wanted to get a little bit more focus to you're having a common sense of, generally which of these should we be trying to address first. And if there is an action that manages to do both affordable housing and workforce attraction and retention, or manages to address workforce housing and as a result makes it easier to attract and retain people because it's just impossible to separate those issues, that's great. We just wanted to sort of narrow our focus for the next step a little bit.
Okay. Warren, did you have your hand up by any chance?
I did, and I was going to say some of what James said. I think quality of life it takes on a lot of this. I agree. I look at the three areas that we all need to. I look at it as the triage: affordable housing, workforce development, and access to affordable childcare. Because if we can begin to solve all three of those problems, we will have a vibrant workforce, and those nationally 4.5 million people, mostly women, who have left the workforce will be able to come back, and we'll have a vibrant workforce here. So I look at those three as the triage of problems that we need to be working on over the next period of time.
Okay, great. It looks like there's a check down here at the bottom corner, and it looks like it belongs to you, Warren. So I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I tried to mute myself, and it ended up being a check.
Oh, okay. So I'll just delete that right here. Okay, so it looks like, I mean, just by looking at this, the top themes are housing, workforce, and infrastructure from what we're seeing. So I just wanted to ask one more time and give folks the opportunity to change your option post-conversation, your choices post-conversation if you wish. Please go ahead and do so right now. And if not, I can move forward to assigning you all homework. Does everyone feel good with their choices? Okay, I see no changes, so, oh, go ahead.
Is it possible to pick 4, since we all talked about how quality of life kind of is important and kind of covers little pieces of everything else? I don't know how restricted we are to 3, or if other folks even agree with that.
3 was an arbitrary manageable number.
Yeah, if you want to pick 4 and all of a sudden quality of life becomes top of the list, then that's fine. So I'd say go ahead and go for it.
I'd be up for that.
Okay.
I would too. I think Dan made a compelling case. So.
All right.
Okay, so the homework for next week?
Okay. So for homework for next week for you all, what we're just going to ask you to do is to go back to your communities and use your plans and policy priorities, and just come back to next week's call with one action item per theme. So we as an SRPC, RPC, and REDC, we can do the same. We'll select the top priority actions from our regional plans, and then we can come back together and we can do a similar exercise to identify what the priorities are. So it's a pretty easy, pretty quick homework, but I can send this in the agenda as well in writing.
So I guess a little bit more clarity on that. We're thinking for the actions, something that specifically we as a group, the Seacoast economic development stakeholders, could take action on in the next 6 months to a year. So, some strategies may be several years out. Those are things that we may need to put in the parking lot for a little bit. There may be some things that you really need a municipality's authority or bailiwick to tackle. We are looking for things that we collectively as a group can advocate on behalf of, could maybe use some funding or pursue some funding to implement, or potentially working within the framework of some of the regional organizations with the skills or funding that we already have, depending on scale and scope. So does that make sense to everybody? Great.
So I guess we can just determine those top themes right now. They're going to be, the top one looks like it's affordable housing. Second one, workforce attraction, retention, and development, it looks like. And I would say infrastructure would come in as third.
And then we're throwing in quality life
And then,
as number
yeah.
4.
And we can reiterate those instructions when we send around the notes in the agenda. We can also recap those themes. So any final comments, questions on this activity? Margaret?
So one activity we can all do to address housing in the next couple of weeks is attend the Seacoast Housing Summit. There's a good action item. If you haven't registered, put the link in the chat, dovernh.org/housing. It's a hybrid event, so you can attend it via Zoom or in person at the McConnell Center in Dover. It is free to attend. We have very strong speakers this year, including John and Maggie Randolph of Harmony Homes by the Bay, who have taken their workforce housing issues into their own hands and actually built housing for their staff. So I encourage you to register if you have not done so already.
I love that segue.
Love a good segue.
Any other comments, questions for the group before we go?
My only comment is that I can't believe I finished this with 2 minutes left.
Well done.
Nice
All
work.
right. Seeing none, thank you all. Have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, thank you.
Well done, Natalie.
Oh, thank you. I want to make sure I save this before I'm out.
Yeah.
There should be an export function somewhere on.
Yeah, I found it now.
Whiteboard
Save
screen.
as PNG. Okay, great. Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.